Well, let's move on to other news now. And amid heightened concerns that North Korea may be about to return to a confrontation with Washington, China, South Korea and Japan are all set to hold a trilateral summit in China. And ahead of that trilateral summit, the Chinese President Xi Jinping met with the South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Beijing. Now, during the meet with Xi, the South Korean President Moon Jae-in said that the stalled denuclearization talks and a recent flare-up in tensions between US and North Korea are not proving beneficial for Pyongyang. Ahead of the trilateral talks, a Chinese president has also met with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Monday. Both the leaders discussed the bilateral relations between the two countries. They also discussed President Xi's proposed visit to Japan in spring next year. Remember, North Korea had set a year-end deadline for the United States to change what it says the policy of hostility amid a stalemate in efforts to make progress on their pledge to end North's nuclear program and establish lasting peace. Despite several meetings between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and the US President Donald Trump, there has been no substantive progress in dialogue, with North Korea demanding international sanctions be lifted first. Thus, North Korea will also occupy a major part of this talk, obviously. Meanwhile, the leaders of all the three countries are to hold their latest meeting amid feuds of their own over trade, military manoeuvring and historical animosities. Ahead of the meet, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that the ties between Tokyo and Seoul remain strained over trade and security issues, as well as compensation for wartime forced labor. Meanwhile, economic cooperation remains one of the main issues that continues to bind all three countries together.
作为近邻，三国之间存在历史、领海等分歧，本属正常。关键是三方要管控好分歧，做大合作蛋糕，同时防止外来因素的干扰。在这个方面，三国领导人有高度的共识。
Well, Professor James Brown, international affairs expert, is now joining us live from Japan for the latest on this trilateral meeting. And Professor Brown, thanks very much for talking to us this evening. Now, these countries, of course, have been, sparring on several occasions on several issues. But let's start with China and South Korea and their ties. The ties between the neighbours have obviously nosedived in 2017 after Seoul accepted the placement of the THAAD system in South Korea. And Beijing saw this as, peering into its territory. Since then, of course, they've resolved much of this. But still, there are many, many things to be discussed, even as, of course, North Korea remains one of the agendas as well.
Yeah, that's right. The China-South Korean relationship has had its rocky moments in recent years, especially, as you mentioned, in relation to the THAAD deployment. Since then, however, things have been a lot easier between the two countries. And in particular, they came to an agreement known as the Three No's Agreement, which included a South Korean commitment not to install further elements of a US missile defense system within South Korean territory. So in that regard, after that, relations have come out of the freeze and have been improving, especially under the leadership of President Moon in South Korea.
Mm-hmm. And as, of course, as I said, that as the U.S. sort of reaches a stalemate time and again with the North Korean leader, what can Japan and South Korea hope to achieve with China's influence with North Korea?
I think here you see an opportunity for China to try and play the role as very much a peacemaker, as a responsible international stakeholder, because China here is saying that the cause of the tensions is between North Korea and the United States, and China says that the route out of this situation is to reduce the sanctions pressure on North Korea. And along with Russia, China has been very direct in saying that North Korea needs to be rewarded for having frozen its missile tests in recent months, and that if we're not going to go back to a situation of the brink of conflict, then efforts need to be made to reduce the sanctions. So that's what China's going to be pushing for. I think South Korea is sympathetic to that outlook. Japan, however, is much more in favor of a harder line approach towards North Korea. So the three countries don't really see eye to eye on that particular issue.
Right. And of course, Japan has had, been wary of China's military expansion as well. But how much do you think the conversation will also focus on trade? Now, China, of course, being keen to better its trade relations with all its neighbours, including India and, of course, with South Korea and Japan as well in the recent past.
Yes. Well, in the past, when we've had these trilateral meetings, the way that they've been approached is very much that the three countries have tried to avoid the most thorny political issues, and instead of trying to focus on areas when they can come to an agreement. And for that reason, they've often focused on economic issues. And I think that will be the same here. And in particular, talking about the possibility of a trilateral free trade agreement. Now, this is not something which can be easily agreed. It's a process that will take many more months, indeed potentially years. But I think that that's one area where they can begin to try and talk about making progress. And that's something really quite different from what you see in relations between China and the United States, where, of course, the United States has taken quite a tough approach towards China on trade, imposing tariffs. And it's quite a contrast you can draw between the US and its allies in East Asia in terms of their approach towards China on trade.
Right, absolutely. Professor Brown, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this evening and sharing your thoughts on what we can expect from this trilateral between China, Japan and South Korea.